The SEC championship game, it just means more. The number 5 Georgia Bulldogs take on the number 2 Texas Longhorns, a rematch game from October where Georgia went on the road and beat the Texas Longhorns by double digits. Now the Longhorns come into this game favored again by 2.5 points. 4 p.m. kickoff on ABC. Kirk Herbstreit on the call in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta, Georgia. Brad, we could go on and on and on about this storyline, about the storylines in this game and the implications for the playoff seeding. Is Georgia going to get in with a loss? Are they going to get knocked out? We're going to have to find out come Saturday afternoon. Thoughts on this game? And I got the helmets behind me. It's a big one. Who comes out on top to win the SEC championship game?
Well, I will start off by saying, to answer your question, yes, I think Georgia gets in if they lose. Also, note for Texas fans: let's keep the bottles to ourselves this weekend if the call doesn't go your way. Absolutely ridiculous. I'm not going to get into that. Also, side note, I was in Austin for that weekend. I was not at the game. I was there for the F1 race. Man, Austin is a unusual town. It's so cool, and if we ever have a barbecue episode, I will have plenty of thoughts. But
Me
anyway,
too.
Nate, getting to this game, man, you talked about so many storylines. I want to start off with the Texas Longhorns, and Nate, something that's, as we've been recording this episode, something that stands out to me is these teams in their first year in their new conferences. How many of those new teams have made the conference championship? It's incredible. SMU, Oregon, Texas. I'm not going to continue to go on, but
There's
it's
a few
really, really,
others, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's really, really incredible. And I think it's really cool. And, everyone has their feelings about conference expansion, but look, the fact that, we have so many teams their first year in the conference that are doing this, I think it's impressive. But yeah, jumping with Texas, starting with, Nate, I know me and you had a conversation last year after Texas played Alabama. We both said Texas has a SEC ready defense, and we've seen that this year. Especially, I was so impressed, man. They went on the road to College Station, and A&M doesn't have a unbelievable offense, but man, they shut them down. I mean, that goal line stand. To really seal the game was very, very impressive. Offensively, to be honest, and I will, admit, I've watched Texas games. I've not, seen every one, but I will say the offense at times to me, Nate, has not impressed me. You look at just the last 3 weeks here in November: 17 points against A&M last week, 31 against Kentucky, and then 20 against Arkansas. I it's not a typical Steve Sarkisian offense. I know they're a little beat up. Their star tackle Banks is, I haven't seen an injury update. I think he's questionable. We know Quinn Ewers has battled some injuries. Isaiah Bond, their superstar receiver, don't know, I think he's obviously going to play, but don't know what percentage he's at. But, the Texas offense has been good, but not great. And Nate, one of the storylines I'm watching for, because we've seen Georgia, and I'm going to get to them in a second, we've seen Georgia struggle against running quarterbacks. I'm really, really wondering how big of a role Arch Manning has in this one. Of course, he scored the opening touchdown last week on a very, very impressive read option. There's definitely going to be some packages. I'm interested to see, of course. We did see him come in for, I know, one series. I'm trying to remember if it was two in the matchup with them in October. But he made a few plays, but they both had that look on the face after getting sacked a few times. Like, oh man, this is SEC play. So yeah, Texas. Steve Sarkisian is just he's a program builder. He thrives on culture there, and they've got a good team. Jump over to Georgia. Georgia's been not your typical Georgia team, of course, and they don't have the it's a good defense. It's a defense that probably 90% of the teams in America would take, but it's not the Kirby standard, the Kirby Smart standard defense that we've seen. They struggle against the run. I think, Nate, the one thing that stands out to me is they're a lot more bend but don't break this year. And of course, they got out in an absolute shootout with Georgia Tech last week. But I think you're going to see a very, very similar game plan out of Georgia that you did, back in October. I think they're going to attack Quinn Ewers. I think Arch is a good runner. I don't know that he is the runner that Haynes King was last week, just to be honest. But Steve Sarkisian as the play caller is absolutely going to have that. Nate, what really stands out to me is how different Carson Beck looks. Carson Beck was going through a horrible streak. Mississippi State the week before Texas, he threw 2 picks. He has 3 really bad picks against Texas. He throws 2 more against Florida. And then really, I mean, he was under duress against Ole Miss and threw just 1 interception there. But then in the month of October, and granted, I know UMass is in here, but he's thrown 11 touchdowns, no picks. He's taking care of the football. We're seeing 2023 Carson Beck. And I'm going to be honest, to me, that's going to be the difference. I think we talked about Kirby is just a master motivator, and he's been preaching these guys all week. Everyone's doubting you. Everyone's, high on Texas. And I think that's the difference. I think Carson Beck is playing his best football. I think they're going to come out with a defensive game plan. I don't think it's going to be a shootout. I don't think it's going to be, a 10-7 ball game. I think we're going to look at, a 24-20 type ball game. And I'm going to take Georgia to get a score late in the fourth quarter to come out on top.
Brad, this is a tough matchup. I grew up a Texas Longhorn fan, my early childhood, watching Vince Young, Cedric Benson, Colt McCoy. And then I get older and I attend the University of Georgia, where I got to see Jake Fromm take the team and take the nation by storm, really, with Kirby Smart. And it's been incredible to watch these two teams. I can't lose in this game, honestly, Brad. I love both of these teams. Obviously, I'm a dog fan. I bleed red and black, but my parents are both from Texas, and they're big burnt orange and white for the Texas Longhorns. The family's divided in this one. My dad's rooting for Texas. As a fan, I'm rooting for Georgia. But, Brad, when I break this game down schematically, I got to give the edge to Steve Sarkisian. The biggest thing that I've noticed, and I've heard this on several podcasts, and it's so true. We look at Kirby Smart teams in the past, and what have they been great at? Defense. He's a defensive coach, right? You look at them this year, they've struggled on defense and on offense. Don't know why. A lot of that probably has to do with Mike Bobo's terrible play calling, which, by the way, probably should be fired after the end of the year, even if they make a playoff run. But that's neither here nor there. The biggest thing that stood out to me that I've heard on podcasts, Brad, is the fact that Steve Sarkisian is an offensive guru, and yet his defense is playing absolutely incredible. Had a bit of a breakdown game. Georgia got some lucky breaks early on in Austin. I was at the game, and look, it was one of the weirdest games I've ever watched or witnessed in my whole entire life. You had people throwing stuff on the field. You had penalties that were called back. I mean, it was just a weird game. Carson Beck, 0 touchdowns and 3 picks in that game. The worst performance he's had all year. I haven't seen Georgia put up a full game performance yet. This is going to have to be that game. When you look at guys like Malachi Stark, you look at freshman running back who's dominant and Nate Frazier. When you look at a guy like Carson Beck, when you look at that offensive line led by Tate Ratledge, when you look at that tight end room led by Oscar Delp, those guys are going to have to stand up in this game and fight. They're going to have to be leaders. They're going to have to really step up to win this one. You can look at the passing game, Brad. You can look at the running game. I think this game comes down to the tight end play. You got one of the best tight ends in all of the nation in Gunnar Helm for Texas, who has just played outstanding this year. He leads the team in receiving yards. 48 receptions, 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns. He's been a safe haven for Quinn Ewers when things break down, when they're getting those 3rd and 5, 3rd and 6. Carson Beck really hasn't relied on the tight end game, and you saw them a few games ago have to rely on their tight ends a little bit more, and it worked. And I'm surprised that Mike Bobo has not gone back to that yet. They've got Lawson Lucky. They've got Oscar Delp. They've got the transfer guy, and I can't remember his name, from Stanford. But this is going to be a battle of the tight ends. I really do believe that. And it breaks my heart to say this as a fan, but as a podcaster and as a college football analyst, I got to take the Texas Longhorns in this one. I think Georgia has had a lot of injuries up front. I think Texas played their worst game against Georgia this year. Give credit to Georgia. They've found a way to win week in and week out, even when their backs were against the wall. Because let's be real, they probably shouldn't have won that game last week against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech played their hearts out. Haynes King had Georgia in shambles on defense, scratching their head, trying to regroup constantly. It took them to 8 overtimes, and they're depleted. They're exhausted. I want to mention this too, Brad, just as a Georgia fan and watching it over the year. Even when Carson Beck has been accurate and has played a really good game, his receivers drop the ball. They can't catch consistently, and that's been really surprising too. Not to say that Georgia has had the most outstanding wide receiver play in recent years compared to like an Ohio State or an Alabama, but you still expect it when that ball hits your hands right in the chest, you got to catch it. And I've seen Arian Smith drop some touchdowns even. And the run game has not been there. When you look at Texas's defense, they're ranked second. As I mentioned, they're only giving up 11 points per game. And again, that Georgia game was an outlier. Look, I'll be rooting for Georgia on Saturday. I'm a Georgia fan. I went to Georgia. But as a college football analyst, I got to give the edge to Texas. I just think Texas wins the big game, I should say. I almost said Big 12, the SEC championship game in their first year. Props to these two programs, though. They fought, scratched, and clawed through so much difficulty this year, especially Georgia. Georgia's had the toughest schedule in all of college football, in my opinion. You can comment down below and argue with me if you want, but you got like three games on the road that are top 10 matchups. It's just incredible to even come away with a win in Austin, even though they lost at Ole Miss and at Alabama. You just got to give them a lot of credit for beating Texas and Tennessee because it's not easy. But give me Texas in a close one. Going to be rooting for Georgia, but I think as an analyst, again, Texas comes out on top in a really, really close matchup. Let us know down in the comments who you think is going to come out on top in the SEC championship Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. kickoff on ABC.